Hello everyone and welcome back. So today we'll be talking about Archimedes Principle, and you've probably heard of Archimedes, and that might be because of this one folk tale about him having run through the streets of a town called Syracuse yelling Eureka. So the tale goes somewhat like this: the king of Syracuse had ordered his most brilliant inventor to determine whether his crown, the crown that he had, was made of pure gold or not. So let's just look at this crown over here. Okay, I don't even know why this is required. Okay, so he had ordered him to determine whether the crown was made of pure gold or not. So he thinks a lot about it, and when he's about to step into his bathtub, he has this sudden insight. And so, this sudden insight put him into such a frenzy that he immediately exited his house and ran into the streets of Syracuse and ran straight to the king's palace to tell him that he had finally found a method to determine whether his crown was made of pure gold or not. So, the insight that he had was actually came to him when he was about to climb into his bathtub, and he found that the water level actually rose up when he climbed into the tub. So, he made a logical leap and assumed that whenever an object was immersed in a fluid, it would displace an amount of water or fluid in general that is equal to its own volume. So, using this fact, he would immerse the king's crown in a beaker of water that is just filled, and when the crown was immersed, the fluid would flow out, which is generally water, and then he would calculate exactly the amount of water that was displaced, that is the amount of water that flew out. And that is done pretty easily because you can easily measure water, whereas you can't measure the volume of an irregular object. Yeah, so that is the main problem. And of course, the weight or the mass of the ground could also be easily measured using a weight balance, which was pretty easy at that time. So having both the mass and the volume, he could easily calculate the density, and the density of gold was also known pretty widely at the time. So he could compare this value to the actual value of the density of pure gold, and if it was actually lesser than the density of pure gold, he would conclude that there was some additives added to it, like in the form of, say, zinc or copper or other, well, cheaper metals in general. So that is this short folk tale about Archimedes. But as with most folk tales, this is probably false, like with the one about with the apple falling on Newton's head. So, with that short folk tale out of the way, let's actually begin with the Archimedes principle. So, what we saw now was that one statement of the Archimedes principle is that the volume of the object that has been placed within the fluid is equal to the volume of the water that is or fluid that is displayed. Says I'll just write water over here. And but keep in mind that this is not generally true because this is only true if the density of the object is greater than or equal to the density of water. But and as to the reason for that is what we'll soon see. But there is another other more fundamental way of stating it, and that is the upthrust that a fluid experiences. So I can call that by say F upthrust is equal to the weight of the fluid displaced. So I can say weight, or I can just say force of gravity on the fluid. So I can say Fg and fluid. So you can just say water again. So what this means is that whenever you immerse an object within a fluid or water in general, the water that is displaced by it will cause there to be an upward force exerted on the object. And the reason for that is what we'll see right now. So let me just draw a beaker over here. This is one line over here. This is another line over here. And another last line over here. And so let me just draw the surface of the fluid over here. Alright. And we are going to immerse an object of say volume V over here. So now we saw in the previous video that the pressure difference between this and this point would be equal to say rho gh. But in the previous case there was no upthrust that was exerted because the pressure at each point would be neutralized by the pressure of the water below it or the pressure of the water above it. But in this region, since we're actually immersing a solid object over here, we can no longer say that that is true. So there's actually a net force created over here, because the pressure due to the water below over here cannot be neutralized due to the pressure over here, because there's no water over here. It will only be, say, opposed by the pressure over here, and that is nothing but, see, the atmospheric pressure. We'll call that PA. Alright? And the pressure that is exerted over here will actually be PA, because that atmospheric pressure will still be there, but also there will also be the difference in pressure due to these difference in pressure between these two heights. So that will actually be equal to, say, rho gh. So we can say that P2 minus P1, that is the difference in pressure between these 2 points, is actually equal to rho gh, where h over here is the difference in height between these 2 points. But over here we're interested in the forces, because again, like I just stated, it the Archimedes principle in terms of forces. So to get forces, I will multiply this by the area of cross section of the volume, area of cross section of the object over here. So when I do that, I'll have F2 minus F1, which is nothing but the upthrust, is equal to rho g h into A. Now, and what is this quantity over here? This is nothing but the volume of the fluid that has been displaced. Alright? So we can say F upthrust is equal to volume of fluid that has been displaced. And now this rho times V, that is volume of water or volume of fluid, is nothing but mass of the fluid, and times G. And this is nothing but the force of gravity acting on the fluid over here. So we have proved the fact that the upthrust that is exerted on the object over here is nothing but weight of the fluid that has been displaced by the object. Alright, so we got the value of the upthrust that is exerted by the fluid, but what exactly is the fluid opposing over here? And well, that is nothing but the object's weight over here. So the object's weight acts downward, and that we can write that as, say, m object into g, and this is nothing but rho object into volume of the object into g. So in this special case that these two values are equal, we'll find that say rho object v object g is equal to rho water g, it doesn't really matter, g water. And so we know g is obviously the same. So g is the same, and so we can write rho object by rho water is equal to volume of water by volume of object. And this quantity over here is actually called the specific density or the relative density. And so we can just say specific density. And this is nothing but the ratio of the density of object to the density of water. And so this equation actually has a lot of interpretations along with it. Now, firstly, it shows you why the volume of the object and the volume of the water displaced need not be equal. They will only be equal when the densities of the two objects are equal. That is, if an object that has a density exactly equal to the density of water, then in that very specific case, the entire object would be immersed over here and it would be completely still over there. However, if the density of the object was say less, then we would find that volume of water would actually be less than the volume of water displaced would actually be less than the volume of object. So what this actually means is that let me just rub this over here. What this means is that the object will not be completely immersed in the fluid. So it will be somewhere over here, somewhat like this, such that only a portion of it is immersed in the fluid, because only that portion immersed is required to produce an upthrust that will oppose the weight of the object. Suppose it were, say, if I push the object down and it were like say displaced a bit below this level, we would find that the value of the upthrust would increase, and this would be greater than the object's weight, so it would have a net acceleration upwards, and so it would continue then on in simple harmonic motion. But that's not something that we need to get in right now. But the point that I'm trying to make over here is that objects will only displace a volume of water that is required for them to produce an upthrust that equals their weight. So what about the case in which the density of the object is greater than the density of the water? Well, in that case, this equation won't really be valid because there is no scenario in which the upward upthrust that is exerted by the water can equal the weight, because you simply the weight of the water displaced will never be able to oppose the weight of the object. So in that case, the object will always have a net downward acceleration which is equal in magnitude to the difference between these two forces, and that is of course neglecting any viscous forces that might arise. So that was a short overview of the Archimedes principle. I was thinking of also doing the equation of continuity in this video, but then I thought of discussing a pretty interesting problem related to this. So I will instead be discussing that problem. So in that problem, you have this boat over here, right? There are also versions of this with an ice cube and things, but they all test the same concept, alright? So this is a boat over here, and you have, suppose, a man, alright? So there's this man over here. Oh god. And he is carrying a pretty heavy stone, okay? But the stone is not that heavy that it causes the boat to sink. It is just heavy enough that the boat, that the upthrust exerted by the water can equal the weight of the boat, but not heavy enough that the boat starts to sink. Alright, so this is a lake over here, and this is the stone. Alright, so the question is whether the water level over here will be greater when the stone is inside the boat or greater when the stone has been thrown outside into the lake and it is sinking over there. So you could pause the video, think about it for a second, and then I will give the solution. Alright, so I'm assuming you have paused the video and had a try at it. So let me present my solution of the problem. So the way to think of it is calculate mathematically what the height will be before the stone has been thrown and after the stone has been thrown, because this is not a solution that you can just think of, well, it's a solution that your intuition that actually gets wrong, because I tried this using my intuition as well, and I did actually get it wrong as well. So think about what volume of water has been displaced when the stone is within the boat, right? So I'm assuming that the lake ends over here. Alright, this is the ground, and I'm going to start my solution over here. Alright, so let's think about the upthrust exerted, right? So let's write that as F upthrust, and that I'm assuming is going to be equal to the weight of the boat, the weight of the man, and the weight of the stone. But I'm just going to include the weight of the man within the weight of the boat because it's constant in both the equations, both the solutions. So weight FB, that is FB, the force of gravity acting on the boat plus the force of gravity acting on the stone, and that's also given that the density of the stone is greater than the density of the water. So F upthrust is equal to this, and so we can write this as rho G volume of water. In fact, I'm going to write this as rho G, say, area of the lake, the entire lake. And so obviously the difference in heights will be very minuscule, but it will be there. And so what you're interested in over here is the height that the water level of the lake rises due to the boat being within it, and that is equal to, say, rho of the boat times G times, say, the volume of the boat, okay, plus, and over here the entire weight of the stone is supported. Now this is the key to the problem, because over here the entire weight of the stone is supported, whereas when it is in the water the entire weight cannot be supported because the water cannot exert an upthrust that will cause the stone to stop moving, because it is not capable of, it cannot displace enough amount of water in order to oppose the stone over here. But in this case the stone is within the boat, so the average density of the boat may still be lower than the density of water, and thus in this case it is able to exert an upthrust that will allow it to stay afloat, and thus it will. So let's just look at the maths. If that logic it's a bit non-intuitive because it takes a bit of time to settle in your brain. Like you need a little time to let it marinate. So, uh, where was I? Yeah, rho stone times G times say the volume of the stone. All right. So I'm going to cut G G G, and so what I can write is H in this case. That's why I can write this as H1. H1 is equal to rho boat times V boat plus rho stone times V stone by rho A, and of course this is rho water. Alright, so this is the height in the first case. Similarly, in the second case, I have to say this upthrust, force of upthrust will be equal to the force of the boat, that is the force of gravity acting on the boat, plus, however, in this case, it can't be equal to the force of upthrust cannot be equal to the that force of gravity that is acting on the stone, like I just mentioned up there earlier. I mean, so this will only be equal to rho g rho water times g times the volume of the stone. All right. So if I expand this, I can write this as Fb is actually equal to say rho b times GVB plus rho W G V stone, and of course I can write this also as rho G A H2. Alright, and so if I cut, wait, hold on, I can't cut the density. Yeah, if I cut G everywhere, I really need to write the subscripts over here. Rho water, rho say boat, I've already written boat over there, and G as over here as well. Alright, so H2 in this case will actually be equal to, so I can write this as rho B VB. So this is identical from what we had above here, but in this case, instead of rho stone V stone, we have rho W V stone because of what I just talked about earlier. So if this is equal to this, we can write this as H2 as rho water times A. Alright? And if I try to subtract, say, H2 minus H1 to find out which is greater, so suppose I do H2 minus H1, this term will get completely cancelled because they are completely identical. However, this term can actually be written as V stone by rho W by A into rho water and minus rho stone. And this has to be negative because we know that the stone is sinking within the water. That is its density is greater than the density of water. So since this value is negative and these values are positive by default, we know that H2 minus H1 is actually less than 0. This means that H2 is less than H1 and that the water level actually decreases when you throw the stone within the lake, which is actually counterintuitive. So let me just go through this over once again. What we have in this case over here, that is the stone is within the boat, and the upthrust exerted by the water has to equal the weight of all the objects within the boat. Otherwise the boat will sink, and we know that the boat is not sinking. So the upthrust has to equal. But in the case that the second case, when we throw the stone, we know that this stone is going to sink because there is nothing preventing it from sinking because there's a net force downwards on it. But in this case, there is no net force because there is extra fluid that can be displaced by the boat because its density is less than water. Or I should be saying average density, which takes into account the density of the stone as well. Its average density is less than the density of water, and as a result, it can support the total weight of the boat. But in this case, when you throw the stone within the lake, it can no longer support the weight of the stone because the density of the stone itself is greater than the density of the water. And like we saw over here, there will be a net downward force on it, which causes it to go to the ground. And so, after doing all the calculations, we actually find that the height of the water is actually lesser when the stone is thrown into the lake than when it is inside the boat. So Thank you for watching. I think that will be it for this video, and see you next time.